whenever this thing starts. Okay, so we're live now. This is the second mode Kekragarion of Iakovos, the Proto-Psaltis. It's not a particularly long piece. It has some very interesting features in terms of different motion from what you would call diphonic settings, where the melodic movement is in thirds, and triphonic, where you've got melodic movement in fourths, and that changes it. It sort of mutates the intervals of your chromatic genus ever so slightly, and can make the intervals more hard or soft sounding. So I don't know, I'll probably point some of those out as we go. So I suppose we'll just get started on the paralagi. The Vulgadim, the Kekragarion, Vulgadim, Zonizom, Kekragarion, Zokam, Zozo, so that section right there from Isaku Sonmu is one place where the melodic motion goes triphonic, where you have this motion up to a fourth above the root of the mode, and it tends to morph the intervals. It's interesting in Panvekti, this knee here is actually marked with a soft chromatic phthora. It was a sort of, I don't know, reminder maybe to not to get out of the scale, essentially. But it does tend to morph how the intervals are perceived. You'll perceive those as slightly higher and K as slightly flatter, even if you don't sing it that way. So just an interesting thing to take note of. And we have several sections in this piece that do that. So any questions so far? I don't know. If not, I'll continue. So continue from this vu. Vu zokadim, zokadim, Vozoni zokem, zozoni zokadim, zokadim, gavum, zokadim, gadim, Kekragarion, Vulgadim, Zozokadi, Zodim, Zozonizom, Kezokadim, Gadikadim, Kaninim, Nizokam, Zozom, Kanizokakadidim, Gadikakadigovum, Zokadim, Dikakazozokadim, Iakovos Nizo kezo kedim kezo nizo kekem zo kedi gadivu gadi kedim kezo ni pavu pa vupa nizo ni di kedi gadim Kedika zoni zo kedigavo zokem kedigadigavo di ke nizo kezo nizo kedigam di kezo nizo kekem zo kedim gavum vuzoni zokem zozoni zokedim kezo kedim gavum zo kedim sorry Forgive me, I've had like less than 24 hours to prepare this because I was asked to do this yesterday. But so there are some common theses in some of these you probably will recognize actually from the first mode Kekragarion if you were here for it. One really common melodic theme is like what we get here on Isaku Sonmu, right? Or sorry, Ekekraksa Prose, where you have this. I'm sorry, not there. Where is it? Like here on Tisdei Seosmu, where you have from the Zoken. If you remember when we were in first mode, we had so you have similar ways that you can interpret this, right? You can go from to sing it on melos if you have is really common, where instead of singing you sing other people might sing it a little more plainly as starting from here. So those are just some, that's a very common one. Another really common one is this one right here on Proskes. This is called a Xiron Klasna, and it's quite common as well. So if you're starting from the nizo kezo kedim kezo nizo kezo kedim gadi, and that's to the end of the Xiron Klasma and a little bit beyond. But it's a very common figure. You find it in first mode as well. You find it in multiple modes. So it's a good melodic figure to know. Other than that, there's not much that just pops out as me as, oh yes, the beginning is a super common idea as well, right? This, in second mode, you see this one all the time. You'll see theses that are like this, either Kiri Inian, or there are several variants on this idea, but they all basically have you have it here in Kateftin Thito. They've got 4 beats somewhere, and it goes up on the very common ending. So I don't know. Are there any questions about the paralagi before we move on, maybe to doing this on melos, or would you like me to do it paralagi again? Let me know. I'm not.
Phil, what would be the approximate tempo for a work like this?
It's not particularly fast. I mean, because you're using it for usually to extend a service, right? Or just to give it a greater sort of what's the right word? Solemnity, I don't know, for a big feast. And so normally you'd probably take it at about a tempo of something about that.
Would this be more appropriate for like a for a great feast as opposed to like a normal like a Resurrection Sunday?
It depends on where you are and why you're using it. It would be appropriate for a big feast. It would be appropriate. It's in the books for Agape Vespers. It's for festive occasions. You might use it on a Sunday if you've got a bishop or something, but in general, yeah, you don't use it for just every single occasion. It's for pretty special occasions.
Well, actually, the reason I ask is because our bishop will be visiting us on a Sunday, which is Mode 2.
Oh, I see.
And well, we're not a Greek parish. Do you know, does this particular Lord I Have Cried, does this exist in an English transliteration at all, or?
Not that I know of.
All right.
There's one in first mode, but there's not one in second, I don't think. I'd have to search, but I mean, I don't. It also depends on how your bishop feels, right? So bishop, you're in Bishop Basil's diocese, right?
Correct.
So Bishop Basil can be pretty tired from traveling. He's not as young as he used to be, right? So it just depends on how your bishop feels and other things like that. But so
thanks.
Yeah. If there are no other questions, I guess we can start either on Melos or Paralagi, your choice. I guess we'll just do Melos then. So let me check my pitch. I'm afraid I drifted. The Kirinian Akakram Aksham Aproshan Isham Ana Ishakusham Na non Isha Anakun Shon Kirim Akirim Kekragarion akşam aproşan İşan anam İşakuşon nam non mu pro no şaştı fonim Tijdai, sorry, Tijdai, Inishan, Nozmun, and Kekragarion hanan manan aproshan ishanakum Şonmun Kiriya. I think I've flubbed the rhythm on Ishaku Shonmu, but that kind of gives you the general idea. Like I said, the one thing maybe to be mindful of are these transitions into triphonic movement. Here's another one, is phoni tizdei seosmu. It gets pretty, the intervals start sounding a lot like hard chromatic, just it's the nature of how your ear hears it. Here where you've got Shashti phoni. It's very, the chromaticism starts to become more, the intervals start getting a little narrower, right? And the large interval becomes much wider. So that's just one little thing to keep in mind. Other than that, it's pretty straightforward. Here, I think I didn't hold this. I think I held this for 2 beats. But other than that, it's pretty, yeah, that's basically all I have to say about it. Any questions, comments, remarks?
Philip, I have a question.
Sure.
Why it makes sense to the ear, but why is the high vu flat?
On phony.
Yeah.
So the structure of second mode, if you remember, is that you've got essentially it's just small, large, small, large, small, large. It just repeats over and over. So if you have, starting from the, right, then you got the kazoni pavu ni sokedim. It's flattened just because it's essentially, that's it. It's, you've got small, right? So if you start from the, you've got small, large, small, large, small. That's essentially why it does that. It's just small, large, small, large, small, large for the steps. Theoretically, sorry?
That's a property. That's a property of second mode.
Right, second mode, and also when you're doing Plagal second, you have the same sort of idea where in second mode the structure is a little different because the chromatic interval is very wide. But if you start from a pa, so you go pa, you get the same thing on high. It's not vu, but it's ga, right? So you got pa vu ga ni ke zo ni pa. Then it's pavu, pavu, right? The vu is natural, and then the ga is flat because of how it's constructed as stacked tetrachords. And so you have pavu ga di ke zo ni pavu ga vu pa ni zo ke di, right? And so on and so forth. And so it's a similar construction in between. Oh my God, Sam has logged in from his car. That doesn't seem safe. Anyway, that's sort of the same construction for both modes. I don't know, I could put a chart up or something later, but that's essentially how it works in those modes. Any other questions, remarks?
Phil, would you mind actually just doing that part again too, just so I can hear it again, please?
Which one? The Tifoni, Seos? Okay. No, I'll start from Proskes. Did you want me to keep going, or was that it?
No, it was just that phrase there because I noticed it was kind of hard chromatic the first time. I'm glad you went back and explained it. So
right, it gets that way just because that's how the game works. I don't know how else to describe it. Is even if you were to keep your intervals very strictly soft chromatic, your ear will want to hear it as hard chromatic, and it will shift you that way anyway. So it's quite hard to fight. Now, when you come back down, though, to tease the Seosmu, you need to be very good with your intervals, right? Because then you're on the it is the in Ishan so by that point you need to get back into the softer intervals. So anything else, or should we move on to Kateftin Thito? It's whatever works for you all. If not, I'll assume that we'll just move on. So Kateftin Thito is pretty much the same. It doesn't have that really nice, doesn't have the nice thing you've got on Phonitis de Seosmu, but it has some of its own challenges. This part here, Ostimiama, is especially challenging because it has a jump from Ga to Zo, and so it's pretty funky. So we'll get started on it. Nash Vuvuzigavugazim Kekazokadizim Vugadikazokadikan Zozokazodizom Zoni zokadim gadikadim gagazom. Sorry. Vim gagazoni panim nizokakazokadizim kanim ni
zokem zozom keni zokadizim gadi kadi gavum zokadim dikeke zokadim gadi gavu ni pani zoke ni zoke zodim dikadim kazoni zokadigavun zokadigavu vugadim kekazokadizim dikazoni zokem
Let me start from the Martiria, sorry.
Vuzoni zokem zozoni zokadim kadigavum zokadizim. So this one, it's simpler for the most part, except for Ostimiyama might trip you up because the interval between ga and zo is somewhat tricky. You have the same sort of like hard chromatic things that go on when you jump up to ni, but usually it gets the intervals softened as you start going back down, so it's not very noticeable. I don't know, other than that, this is pretty straightforward. You have most of the theses are familiar probably because they were used in the previous one. I think this one is the only one that wasn't. So with that being said, questions, comments, anything? If not, I'll just go to Melos. So, okay. Nash kataftin thim initom iprosa afhim imu ostimim anama ano anopium nan non su aparsis to non hi ro. Sorry. On hi. Let me start from eparsis. Aparsis onon hi ronon mon tishini on ashpan arinim inim isham anakun shon mum Kyria. So I guess one other thing that I should point out, some other really common ornamentations that you see in this piece. At the end here, you often hear it, Kyrie sung with a sort of attack from above, right? So if you were to do it in paralagi, starting from maybe the V on Isaku Son Mu, so from here, you've got the kazo kadim gavo nizo kazo kadim, right? Where you do a knee on top, and that's quite common. On mo Kyria. Another thing that's really common to do is here on this, all of these figures where you've got usually a petasti with plasma followed by this iporoi with the gorgon and the apli, and then this oligon with another gorgon followed by a na, right? You have, God, if I can remember what the name is for the N symbol. I always mix them up. But when you have this, oftentimes they'll do this one from actually above.
Pelastikon.
Is it a pelastikon or is it the gorthmikon? Which one is it?
Is it na with
It's
an
na.
alpha?
Yeah.
Then yeah, it's a pelastikon.
Okay, pelastikon is for everything that's not basically. So whenever you have this figure, though, oftentimes you get this, right? So you've got this vozon nizoken, so nizoken nizon. That's another very common rendition of it. So when you sing it on melos, nun isana, right? Another common one is for this petashti actually to come at it from above. So we've got isana. It's another very common way of rendering these. So those are just some things to keep in mind. Here you've got another one, right? No. It's common. On the here, it's very common to do this as if it were an ison actually, followed by kendimata, and then with the varia, and then another ison and an apostrophos with gorgon on both. So that you get this right as your figure. That's a common one. Other than that, it's pretty straightforward, most of this. Yeah. So questions, comments, sections you would like me to go over again, either because I made mistakes or whatnot.
So the ESON would be on the pretty much throughout both of these parts. I mean, I'm guessing that it doesn't really modulate or move here.
So that depends. That depends on your personal philosophy with ESON. Some people will move it a lot. Some people see no reason why not to move the ESON down to VU when you're heading to VU. Other people, my teacher included, really, really hate it. So it's much is up to how you were taught to do ESON, I guess. But I would leave it on V for most of this piece. Yeah, I don't really know where I would ever take it off the.
But it's not like for instance, when we're kind of up on knee for a moment, it's not like we're based up there like in Trojos or something where we would move the ESON up to K, you know, that sort of thing.
No, you would probably keep the ESON still on V. You're talking about like figures. I don't know which ones. I mean, this one is the most obvious where it goes really high.
You know, that little thing.
Yeah. When you do this one, you would probably keep it on V. I don't know. Let me see if I can get my little my cute little ESON machine running, but you can hear that, right? So it would sound fine with an ESON, right? Yeah, I'd leave it on V. That's kind of this one is very straightforward. The other one, that first mode one, the ESON could move in quite many different ways, but in this one it's pretty hard to find a place where you'd want to move it, except if you're one of those people that moves the ESON down for cadences on VU. But that's certainly not necessary. But many people do it. So any other questions, sections you'd like to go over again?
I have a question, and a more general question.
Sure.
You talked at the beginning about diphonic versus triphonic melodies.
Right.
Could you go into that a little bit more?
Sure. So when we talk about so in the theoretical, one of the theoretical ways of thinking about second mode is that it is similar diphony, or omiadiphonia, right? Or is it omiadiphonia, where you've got essentially the melody basically only has two intervals to it. Now, in common practice, we widen one of those intervals, but as Chrysanthos details this mode in the Great Theory of Music, he basically says, in second mode, you've got two intervals. You've got the larger interval, which is in Greek meson tonos, and you have the smallest interval, which is the elachistos tonos. So you've got just two intervals, and they just repeat over and over, and hence it's called diphonia, because the structure repeats every 2 notes, right? So you've got, every time you go up 2, you're just got a repeating structure from before. So just as an example from VU, right? Is a smaller interval, right? Is the larger interval. Then you just do again small interval. Then the large interval. Zoni, small interval. Nipa. And then again small interval. Pavu, right? And so on and so forth, and back down. Pani sakedim gavo pani. So it's just this repeating structure over and over. In common practice, 2 of those intervals are slightly widened because it just gives it that soft chromatic sound. But generally, that's what we mean when we talk about diphonic versus triphonic. So it's in a diphonic sound whenever the melody is essentially emphasizing motion in thirds, right? So for example, in the beginning, you're moving from vu to the, right? Kirim inia. And later, you've got a lot of motion from vu, from a kekraksa, right? You've got motion from vu all the way up to the, then to zo, right, back down to the. And so it's the motion is all focused on thirds. But here at Isaku Sonmu, all of a sudden it changes, right? Because the motion all of a sudden goes up to a fourth, and that changes the character of the mode slightly. So that's kind of what we would talk about between a triphonic and a diphonic. And of course, the most extreme example is here, where you're essentially just going up an entire pentachord. So that's essentially what we mean when we say that, if that answers the question.
Yeah, it does. So then the diatonic modes would be triphonic?
So the diatonic modes, like we can go back for a second, tend to be actually tetraphonic, I guess. They're well, I shouldn't say that. Some diatonic modes, third mode is triphonic, for example, in its structure. But then an example of another one that isn't, of course, also some people say that third mode is enharmonic, not diatonic. So that depends on your interpretation of third mode. And if I remember correctly, the theoreticians, some theoreticians, even in one book, they say it's enharmonic, and another it's diatonic. So there's not much consistency on third mode. But many of the modes, like first mode, plagal first mode, plagal fourth mode too, they operate on trochos, which is the wheel, right? So, and that's essentially tetraphonic, where everything is equivalent every fifth. So if you think about like your first mode, you've got your pa, right? Your pa, ke. When you go above ke technically can become equivalent to pa, right? Right. So it depends, and so there's a large interplay between, actually, in many modes like first and plagal first, where sometimes the motion is on the wheel, where every fifth is equivalent, and sometimes it's by octave. And so it's hard to generalize most of these modes. And that's true of almost every mode. Sometimes they move in their sort of normal way, but then other times they don't. And normally they give you something like a phthora to tell you that something unusual is happening. Like an excellent example of that is the ancient melody of the Kekragarion, which I don't know if we want to go into that one, but it has this really interesting phenomenon where if you base it on pa, when you go down, sometimes it treats lo ke as if it were lo ke, and sometimes it treats it as if it were a vu and pa as a ke. So sometimes it's moving by the wheel, as they call it in Greek, in tetraphonic motion, but sometimes it goes by octave. So it depends. I don't know, that probably isn't a clear answer, but
it answers the main question, gives me more things to think about.
Yeah, so.
Well, thank you.
Sure. Yeah, anything else that anyone would like to ask? Yeah.
Could you go back into Katethintito, where the materia is on the, and then you go down to ga, and then the interval between ga and zo is a fourth, but
yeah,
I almost heard it as like a fifth. Maybe I'm just hearing things. Could you do that again for me, please?
Yeah, so the interval here is wide, right? Because if you just think about your scale in second mode, you've got right? it's a wider interval, then we would want to hear it. So let me just get into it. I can start from the beginning, whatever. Okay, so got caught.
Yeah, because just to say, if you did perfect fourth, it would be like an enharmonic zo, like
right,
what you hear in maybe third mode, or if you were heading down a flat diatonic zo.
Right,
but since zo of chromaticism, that's why it's going to sound closer to a fifth than it would a fourth to your ear. We wouldn't call it an augmented fourth, though, would we?
That's a good question. I don't know what we would call that interval. We certainly wouldn't call it a perfect fourth, right? But it is slightly augmented if you're going to use the Western music term. Sam looks like he wants to say something. I don't know. He muted himself.
No, anyway. I did not. You're the Western theory guy. I don't know much about Western. All I was going to say was this is one of those times where at least the little I know about Western theory, it can get sticky trying to use Western terminology to perfectly describe this, because the people who came up with this system, you know, they weren't using Western theory. So like an augmented fourth would have meant nothing to them. So that's why it can get a little bit tough trying to use that terminology.
Yeah, I think that the augmented, you could think of it as an augmented fourth, but don't think of it as being too close to one, because if you do that, you'll make zo too high, and that won't sound good, right? Because typically you've got the zo kadim zo kadim. You don't want it to be a real tritone where it's wide, too wide, just because of how high zo is above v. It's not that wide. In theoretically, you've got theoretically it's what, two moria flatter than a tritone. So
that's correct. I was just looking at it, and so it's 12 plus 8 plus 14, which comes out to 34, and tritone in Western would be 36.
Yeah. Right. So it's 12. It's 12. It's too short of a tritone. So useful to think of it in terms of that, because it's a bigger interval than a perfect fourth. But just keep that in mind. It's not that wide. So,
just because I'm not very good with my microtones at all, would you just like demonstrate for me? I mean, just using random syllables, like illustrating, like for instance, a fourth versus this, for lack of a better term, augmented fourth, just so I can hear it.
So I mean, if you have that fourth, you've got na na, right? It's just like when we sing na na to give third mode, if you use a pihimata at all. No, no, you'd be suicidal to take third mode that high, but that's a perfect fourth, right? Whereas if we've got it in second mode, where you've got this no, no, right? That's your tritone like interval.
Where you'll hear it more here is whether that zo is sounding like it's the third of a major chord or not. He's consistently singing it a little flat of that, so it doesn't sound like it's a major third from the to zo, and it shouldn't be. And so jumping up from ga and hitting that zo, does that zo sound bright? Does it sound like it's a third of that major chord off of the? No, it doesn't. You know, so.
I mean, and you could have this zo be a little higher, because your motion here is getting very close again to being triphonic or tetraphonic rather than diphonic. So it's debatable what intervals you would use, but in general, some people, I'm one of them, try to keep their intervals rather consistent through the mode. So. But anyway, I never actually did sing this for you, so let me sing it. And so if I put my V there, Kotafin finitom I proshan afhin imon Ostimim alama. So I don't know if that helps any.
I'll just get a few more lessons on the recording later. Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else? You know, sorry if it's a little rough today. I didn't have much time to prepare, so but that's basically it for this Kekragarion. It's fun Kekragarion, but it's pretty straightforward. So if there's nothing else, I guess we can call it a day, or I don't know, but it's up to you guys. Right. Well,
thanks for doing this, Phil.
Yeah, no problem.
Yep, thank you.
Phil.
Yeah, thank you for coming. Sorry again if there were any mistakes. So.